and welcome to Podworld, a podcast about the podcasts that you should be listening to. I'm Louise Blaine.
And I'm David Marr Roberts.
DMR.
Or DMR. Welcome back, or actually simply welcome if this is your first time. And we've got to say, big thank you, because after the first 3 episodes, we've been having some amazing feedback over the last few weeks. And it's just lovely to hear that we're actually helping people discover new categories and new podcasts to listen to. And that's why we created this podcast, to help navigate the ever-growing catalogue of podcasts.
Yeah, it's becoming completely overwhelming. But to echo that, it's been amazing to have people recommend stuff and be excited by things and give us the recommendations. And I'm going to kind of scatter some recommendations through the show, actually, because so many people have been so excited about different things that I'll just kind of mention as we go. But if you've not listened to Podworld before, basically every episode we feature a genre, whether it's true crime, which we did last time, or it's comedy, or nature, or tech, or any of these things. We pick 4 kind of different podcasts that we go into in a little bit of depth, and then we interview a podcast creator from that genre to find out a little bit more about what goes on in their head. And then at the end, we wrap up with some extra bits that we couldn't kind of cram in anywhere else, and we have listener recommendations as well.
And today, what have we been doing for the last 2 weeks? We've been laughing.
Yes.
We've been laughing an awful lot, because today we are looking at comedy podcasts. And later in the show, Lou has a chat with a bit of a special guest.
He is a special guest.
A very special guest. And he's the comedian and writer and radio presenter. And I think a lovely human. And it's Danny Wallace.
Yes, we'll talk a little bit more about him later, but can I honestly say it was so exciting to speak to Danny Wallace. Like, speaking to Danny Wallace was like having an interactive Danny Wallace podcast in my head. It was very strange, but yes. It
was like your personal Danny Wallace podcast.
Yes, it was
just
wonderful.
For you at that point.
Yeah, but I guess before we move on a little bit, we'd like to ask you a favour. Well, actually, a couple of favours, just a couple. We'll get them out of the way early, and we might remind you at the end. But if you can, tell your friends about Podworld. If you like it, tell your friends, share it, follow us on social, which is Podworld on Twitter and also on Instagram, and also on Apple Podcasts. It's a pain in the neck, but if you could give us 5 stars, and even better, if you could write us a review. It means you need to set up a nickname, but it's really, really speedy, and it basically means that Apple see us and more people can see us, and then more Podworld can happen. So thank you in advance. We really appreciate that. So
we absolutely do. Let's
get started with comedy podcasts.
For those of you who love nothing else but to laugh out loud, or looking a bit ridiculous when you're on public transport and you're in your own world and you're pissing yourself with laughter.
Remember public transport? DMR, remember when public transport was a thing? And now is the time. I will say, we had Rob Watts on Twitter. He said that he loves laughing in public and then seeing people's reaction. And I don't like that. So I will talk about it a bit later. I've had a couple of podcasts which have made me want to literally explode. Like, all of the emotions are being held in my head and I want to explode. But I'm trying desperately not to let them leak out in case people think I'm mad, or in case people think I'm laughing at them, which is not the intention.
Yeah, there's a lot of that. I definitely have had a lot of me sort of sniggering, but I have to actually hide my face in the process because I think people think I'm going to be a madman or something. But for those people, everybody who does love to sort of laugh out loud, actually 2020 and COVID, I know it's been really shitty for lots and lots of people. But actually, for lovers of comedy podcasts, it's been a bit of a boom year, because what's happened is that a lot of actors and comedians no longer do what they usually do. They don't have an audience. A lot of them, their income has been harmed, and they've turned to podcasting or live streaming, actually, on Twitch, some of them. And you've got, Chris Rock or Catherine Ryan, Jason Bateman, Rob Beckett, Josh Widdicombe, Alan Carr, Mo Gilligan. All of those have launched podcasts in the last 12 months and have added to what was already quite a rich category. I've added a whole load of more podcasts. So, the comedy genre, I think, having looked at it for the last few weeks in depth, comes in sort of a few different genres. You've got the sort of stand-up, and then you've got the improv, but then you've got a lot of the sort of 2 to 3 people chatting and being funny. And actually that extends into even other genres. We've looked at sort of, there's true crime podcasts that have a humorous element, and there are history podcasts that can be humorous that we've featured in in an episode before of Podworld. So, but there's also then the scripted comedy fiction, which I haven't really listened to so much, but actually it features in some of the recommendations we got. But the thing is really that I find that what makes us laugh is not universal. You know, what makes me piss myself laughing is not necessarily what makes you laugh so much. So, you know, we're all different. So what makes you laugh? As you might have realised, I err on the darker side of things because I put the laughter into slaughter is one of my favourite puns. But I think it's really important to say that when we were talking about history podcasts, it turns out a history podcast is just everything. Everything is history. Everything has history. So comedy podcasts can be everything. Like it doesn't, they can be any topic. But I mean, I'll talk about it a bit later. I love My Favorite Murder. I love, that's a true crime comedy podcast. I love movie podcasts like Strong Language, Violent Scenes, which is hilarious. But I promise there doesn't just have to be gore to make me laugh. There doesn't just have to be gore. As my recommendations in this, and I think maybe you'll be surprised by how actually quite cuddly I like some of my podcasts to be. So here then are 4 of our top comedy podcasts that you should be listening to, but don't worry, there's more at the end, and if you don't like them, there's even more again, so it's very subjective, but here's what made us lol. So for my first recommendation in this category, I went for, I know it's an obvious one, and I think a lot of people, when we asked that on Twitter, a lot of people mentioned this one. It is My Dad Wrote a Porno.
Belinda leaned back on the white leather seat and started to gently sweat.
Erotic.
Oh.
Nothing sexier than a sweaty lady.
It's quite a few years old now. I don't know when they launched it. 4 years ago, 5 years ago, something like that. But it is an absolute classic. You know, it's the one that I do burst out laughing and crying on public transport. It's just seriously the funniest podcast I've listened to in the last 4 or 5 years, without a shadow of a doubt. I think probably a lot of our listeners will have listened to this already. I read the other day that 250 million people have downloaded this, which is unbelievable. The cast have actually been on a world tour. So I think we can say it was a hit, really. So yes. It's a big hit. But, you know, the podcast, for those of you who don't know what My Dad Wrote a Porno is all about.
I'm going to say now, DMR, I've never listened to My Dad Wrote a Porno. And the reason, just hear me out, and it's not because I don't want to. It's because you've just said the words 5 years. And it's like when someone says, hey, you got to watch The West Wing.
Yeah,
or
I know.
catch up on The Wire. And some of those things I have watched all of, but sometimes I feel like, and I think it's a problem with a lot of podcasts, and it's why we now say where you can drop in and out of a podcast, there are so many hours and we only have so many times in the day that if you don't start at the beginning, sometimes it can feel really overwhelming to look at a podcast and you go scrolling through Spotify, you're like this, and you're like, okay, oh no, I'm still not at episode 1. And that to me puts me off. And it makes me really sad because I know how funny this podcast is and everyone loves it. But I think you do have to go back to the start, right?
You do, but I would say you can listen to the first book as it is, the first series, and you could stop there. You don't have to listen to book 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay. I haven't listened to all of the subsequent ones. So, but for those who don't know about it, including you, Lou,
like me,
the podcast is really simple. So there's this guy called Jamie Morton, and he found out that his dad wrote what he called erotic literature, and the book's entitled Belinda Blinked. Which kind of sets the scene quite well. And the idea of the podcast is that Jamie basically reads chapter by chapter. So one episode is one chapter. And he reads it to his friends, James Cooper and Alice Levine from Radio 1. And both James and Alice provide an incredible, hilarious running commentary and reaction to basically the writing. Alice especially she just makes me laugh all the time.
She's so funny.
She's so witty. She's so quick. But also, I just think her laugh is infectious by itself, right? And it's the combination, basically, of Jamie's dad's writing, because he clearly isn't an erotic fiction writer. But, yeah.
Are you saying he's no Chuck Tingle, DMR?
Absolutely. His writing is just... he will refer to... to Belinda's tits as hanging freely like pomegranates in one chapter. And then the next chapter, he describes them as kumquats. Now,
why is it always fruit?
Yeah.
Why is it always... Do you know something? This is a real thing. So there is a book of the Meg, the book about... I'm going somewhere with this. The book about the Meg, which is about a giant shark.
Yes,
the Megalodon, the movie that
yeah.
Jason Statham was in.
Yeah.
Statham even. Was based on a book. And I thought, well, that's great. It's going to be like Michael Crichton's Jurassic Park. And I'm going to want to read that. And I opened it up. And in the first... I think it was the second page... that breasts were described as melons. And I was just like, I'm out. I'm done.
I'm done.
I'm done. It's kind of like she entered the room breastily. It's just like men writing woman. It's just boob first. It's just like, why? I mean, at no point do I ever even think about how my breasts feel in a situation. At no point am I ever like, gosh.
Oh, but some men do. That's what they go with. Like,
of course,
that's their first thought.
That's their first thought, is how a woman entered the room. Nipples first.
Yes, nipples first, exactly.
But yes, sorry, that was a breast tangent, but yeah, it always cracks me up.
You're absolutely right. But to a degree, the description melons is quite common, even though, maybe not used in the right place. But pomegranates and kumquats, both very different size and shapes, which was quite interesting. And then he also does things that the latest one I listened to, Belinda's sort of waking up from a dazed situation, and he writes, Belinda connected her sense glands to her eyelids. I mean, what is that? So as you can see, basically just reading a couple of the lines, we're wondering what it is, and basically the guys react hilariously to this incredibly funny writing. And it wasn't written to be funny, but I'm sure that's how it then evolved, because I think he wrote the first book and then it basically turned into this entire podcast machine, basically. And he's written 5 books since then. But really, if you're looking for a bit of crazy laughter and get away from everything that's been happening in the last 12 months, and you haven't listened to My Dad Wrote a Porno, then really give it a go.
Okay. I'm going to fix this. I am going to fix this. Now that you've made me feel better about the fact that hundreds of hours aren't a thing, that makes me happy.
They're not necessary.
So thank you. Thank you.
So what about your first one?
Okay, because I'm going to stay on brand for this one.
Of course.
And it's a podcast called Drunk Women Solving Crime.
This is Drunk Women Solving Crime. My name's Taylor Glenn.
Katie Wilkins.
Hannah George.
This is where beer meets breaking and entering.
Negroni meets necrophilia.
And pork meets prostitution.
It's a true crime podcast with a twist of lime.
I arrived at this podcast relatively recently, actually, and I now can't remember who put me onto it, and I'm really sorry, because I do love it, and I want to tell you how much I love it. So hopefully you listen to this and you'll forgive me for forgetting who told me. But basically, it's exactly what it sounds like, DMR. It's 3 brilliant writer and comedians getting really, really pissed and going through a true crime story.
Yeah.
So it's Hannah George, Katie Wilkins, and Taylor Glenn. And I'm honestly going to say they are just the most ludicrously funny women. They are so fast. They are so quick. And I can't say if, booze makes them funnier, but if this is them weakened, they are the sharpest humans. And they have a special guest every week. And the episodes that I've listened to, they go through like quite an old crime.
Yes.
Because basically the way they go through it is they tell the story and they've really well researched the story, but they kind of say, what do you think happened next? Or why is this person like this? Or what law did this? And then they kind of break it down that way to kind of unravel the comedy. And they are genuinely some of the most interesting true crime stories that I've listened to, but also just the funniest thing. Have you listened?
Yeah,
already?
so I listened to a couple because I wanted to know what this was all about. And the one I listened to was just ludicrous. It was a bloke in the 1800s, I think, late 1800s, early 1900s, who had killed his wife because he had a younger mistress. And he was just so inept at how he hid this. And he then tried to escape, run away by his mistress and him disguising as father and son on a cruise ship. Well, on a cruise, on a I guess, a journey to Canada. And it was just the whole thing, the way they described it. It was a really good, story in itself. You would have just gone, oh, this is an interesting true crime story. But yes, the way they they sort of, again, there's a lot of commentary, and I don't know whether the booze plays to it, because every now and then they sort of top themselves up with a bit of drink.
Yeah, it was so extra gin.
But yeah, it's just like being around a fire, listening to three really funny women talk about a story. I could just listen, just sit back and listen to it all night. It was great.
Yeah.
Absolutely
great. They get a really fun guest. I mean, I've listened to a few. That was one that had a comedian, and they were talking about this, someone the Wonder, and he was basically a guy that went missing, and these people were then basically convicted of his murder. And I'm not going to spoil the rest of it, but it was just like learning. It was almost like a You're Dead to Me, but pissed, and focused on murder. So it's really good fun. I also listened to a great episode with Fern Britton, of all people.
Oh, great.
And at the start of the episode, they talk about a crime that happened to their guest. And sometimes that's like a real crime. And other times it's absurd. And Fern Britton's was basically about how she hates, when she used to present, was it GMTV she used to present?
Yeah.
What did she present? So when they used to present, or This Morning,
This
morning.
Yeah.
And she was bitching about how awful magicians were. And it's really it's that kind of lovely, fun comedy. And also there's been I think they called it Male Month. So they've had special men episodes, just so that nobody ever feels left out. So drunk women and a man sometimes solve crime. So it's really good fun.
That's great. I love that. It's fantastic. I would really recommend it. I will be that's on my list now of things to listen to for sure, even though my list has got quite ludicrous over the last few weeks since we started Podworld. But I think that's all we should be doing with our lives, right? It's just listening to other people
honestly,
talk.
We've broken my list. My list is just melted. And it's like, how am I going to keep up with the most miserable true crime if I'm listening to all this fun stuff?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, you're up next. DMR, what's your next?
This podcast got me at the intro, just at the intro music. Absolutely phenomenal. It's Scam Goddess with Laci Mosley. And every week, Laci has a guest, usually a comedian. It's usually a funny person. And the whole thing is she absolutely knows everything about every scam.
She's amazing.
And racket that happens anywhere in the world. And she keeps us up to date, basically, on the latest scams and rackets. And there's kind of different levels. There's the things that the listeners send in, and she always tells them, make sure you've retired your scam before you send it in, because I don't want to take away your money, as it were. But so she has these amazing sort of smaller scams, I guess, that get sent in. But then she also talks about some bigger ones as well, certainly some topical ones. The recent one was there was a vaccine scam in Philadelphia.
It's despicable stuff. She's really brave in going into all of it as well. She doesn't shy away from any scam. She delights in them. She's
literally
amazing.
I mean, it's not made up. She just loves. She loves scam. She actually loves the scam. That's the thing. She's much more of a Robin Hood scam lover. So she'll like a scam that takes away money from the man, and she doesn't like it if obviously the sort of people who shouldn't be losing out lose out. The way I think she's described it, I've seen it described, is it's true crime but without all the death they talked about, and or actually true fun crime. I think she talked about it.
It's true fun crime.
True fun crime. But yeah, so you've got listeners writing in, and there was the one I listened to was just very simply there's a chap that was working in a hotel lobby, and every now and then he had to fill in for the barista. Well, it's not really a barista, for the person selling coffee, and they just had like this Starbucks filtered coffee that they sold at $3.50 a cup. But supposedly the hotel's policy was refills were free. But he just charged $3.50 for refills, and he did it for 4 years, which is pretty impressive, right? That they didn't get caught so that anyway. That's an example of a small scam, I guess, that didn't hurt too many people. But then there's, as I said, the bigger stuff. So, I mean, there's a lot going for this show. I think she's just amazing. I mean, her knowledge, her energy, her wit, enthusiasm. It's just. I just thought it was incredible, and it just injects you with just so much enjoyment as you listen to it. anyway, this one you can dip in and out. It's really easy. You don't have to start anywhere specific, but really do give it a listen.
Her accents are great. Her accents are just hilarious. Her accents absolutely crack me up as well. And then how she apologizes to everyone from that country that she's just mocked so perfectly. There's an episode with Nicole Byer, who actually guests on a stack of other podcasts and has her own podcast. And literally listening to those two talk was a joy, an absolute joy. But yeah, dive in anywhere. That's also, do you have a favorite scam, DMR? Because the one that popped into my head when you were talking about the guy with the coffee cups, wasn't there a chap that stood out that literally drove up to a field next to, I think it was Bristol Zoo, for like 27 years. And he literally took money from people, but parking was actually free, but people would just drive past him and give him £3. And he retired. Yeah. Because they were like, because I think someone like at the zoo rang the council and said, are you going to like get someone to replace the car park guy? He's gone. They're like, what car park guy? Like, he doesn't work for us. Yes. And he'd been there for decades.
Yeah, that was a phenomenal scam.
Just taking the cash. That sticks in. I wonder if she's covered that. She probably has. Someone has probably told.
Someone needs to tell her about that one. Yeah. So what's your final recommendation?
Okay, so my last one is really quite gentle, actually. It's not as sort of actively hilarious as perhaps My Dad Wrote a Porno or Scam Goddess, but Sue Perkins, An Hour or So With, it's just the loveliest, funniest set of interviews that I've listened to in ages. Like, just the kind of really, like, Sue Perkins, if you haven't listened to her or watched her, she's a British comedian who, for years, I think it was 7 or 8 years, she co-hosted The Great British Bake Off before it moved over to Sandy Toksvik and Noel, isn't it? So Noel Fielding. But I just love Sue. She's very, very human, but also very funny. So the minute her as an interviewer, it's just her. In pre-COVID times, the start of the podcast is literally her saying, well, I'm here with you at such and such, and she'll describe the place. And she's, interviewing Mary Berry in her garden, and you can hear the birds, and she describes where the dogs are sitting and stuff. And there's something really lovely and quite comforting about it. She's a very intimate interviewer who isn't afraid just to be funny, because Sue Perkins is funny.
She's the nation's sweetheart. She's a national treasure. She is the mother of cakes. But to me, she'll always be Bez. I went to meet the magnificent Mary Berry at her house in Oxfordshire, and we recorded this interview in the summer of 2017.
There's a definite intimacy and relatability to Sue Perkins that she really brings just real reactions out of the people she interviews, when so many people in these situations, I think, are in press situations or they've been brought out to talk about their TV show or whatever. But she actually just says, hey, what are you doing? Why are you doing it? How do you feel about this? And she keeps probing, but in a really nice, funny way. So she's a really very, very smart interviewer. And I especially, I listened to her episode with Florence Pugh, and it just properly made me laugh out loud at points of it. At one point, Florence Pugh talked about how she might actually just like to work in food and go and just eat sausages all the time. She said, I don't really like sausages. And Florence Pugh then said, what are you afraid of them? And then this whole hilarious discussion happened where Sue Perkins was basically like, I have seen a penis. Like, I'm not afraid of things that are phallic. So it's suddenly like she always brings this gentle hilarity to proceedings, whatever they're talking about. And I think that's really important, to bring laughter into maybe things that are a little bit more challenging in life.
Absolutely.
That, I think it's important to be able to have a smile even if there's a tear in your eyes. So I think it's most of her questions are light, but sometimes she gets really in depth and she's really sensitive, and it's just such a lovely interview show. It's really good.
Yeah, and it lends itself really well to the podcast intimacy that we always talk about, that one-on-one connection. And because of her style, you really feel like you're just there in that back garden with them or on Zoom with them, and it's just you listening in. And that I always find that so magical.
She also, at one point, she interviews, as a little bonus one, she interviews, have you ever listened to Dear Joan and Jericha?
Yes. Actually, it was one of those that I listened to as well. There's been so many. It's definitely been on the list.
So at one point, she interviews Joan and Jericha, who are actually fictional characters created by Julia Davies and Vicky Pepperdine, both very, very funny comedians and writers, but also who err on the real darker side of things. And Joan and Jericha are two agony ants who are just horrific. So if you do listen to them, just, you know that they're fake, they're not real, and they are truly, truly despicable. But they both worked on the TV show Nighty Night, which at one point I was shown and couldn't really get out of my head because it's just one of those unique, a bit like the League of Gentlemen, not Extraordinary Gentlemen, that's something else, but League of Gentlemen. It's that very British dark humour that you're either into or it makes you feel a bit squicky and gross, which is fine because some of them do. But Dear Joan and Jericha, I don't get too squirmy with, and it does make me laugh and then want to immediately put on like Scooby-Doo or cartoons or something because it's too much.
So every episode, we have a chat with the podcast host or a producer from our featured genre. So this is comedy. And obviously for comedy, we thought the best person we could possibly get Lou to speak to was, of course, Danny Wallace.
Yes. So Danny Wallace is ridiculously exciting as a person. Like, he's not just a podcast creator. He does have multiple podcasts. I think we talk about his Audible podcast, What You Talking About, Wallace, which is a series of different interviews. He also has a weekly Danny Wallace's Important Broadcast, which is actually the talk bits from his Radio X Sunday show, sort of without the music. So you just get the chat bits, which is, I think they do 2 hours and it takes it down to about an hour. So it's actually just like talking to your mates on a Sunday morning. But he's also a presenter. He's a writer. He wrote Yes Man, which then had a movie with Jim Carrey. So he has done a lot of things. He's a very funny man professionally, and it was quite intimidating to speak to him, no less, and I will talk about it straight at the start of the interview, is I am a big fan of the Assassin's Creed franchise, and he plays a character called Sean Hastings, who has been in a lot of them, if not all, as part of the modern day element of the series. So I was very excited because he was also like, Sean Hastings, isn't it? So here we go. Here's my interview with the lovely and very funny Danny Wallace.
Danny Wallace. Radio X.
Well, hello. Welcome to another Important Broadcast podcast. This one is absolutely free this week. When are we sending out the invoices or the bills for the others?
It depends what plan you're on. So some of you are going to get a quarterly.
So
one.
I'm very excited for our comedy episode of Podworld to welcome Danny Wallace to Podworld. Hello, Danny Wallace.
Hello there. I like that this is the comedy episode, and I can tell because we're both wearing red noses and big clown shoes.
That's how comedy goes.
That's what you said to do.
And the thing is, though, DMR sent me here to ask you about comedy podcasts, but actually, I just want to talk about Assassin's Creed. So we can,
of course.
We can just talk about
we'll just do that.
Just talk about Assassin's Creed because you're Sean Hastings in Assassin's Creed, which is actually how I'm going to start this episode. Is asking you about you were properly back in Valhalla. Was that really nice?
It was very nice, actually, and going back into the studios and seeing some of the old faces. And I'd always assumed that every time they send me a script, I would get to the end of it and he would have exploded or been offed in some imaginative way. But he lives on.
He does.
So it's going to be sad if that ever happens. I will weep real tears.
I don't want Sean to go. But what we are here to talk about is comedy, and the thing about comedy is it can be about everything.
Timing.
I knew this would be like this. What was DMR thinking? The thing about comedy is it's about everything. It's just things that make us laugh. So is there such a thing as a perfect comedy podcast, Danny? Have you made it? Have you thought it up yet? Have you found it?
Well, the great thing about podcasts is that you get to know the people doing them. And, for me, writing has always been at the core of everything I do, but right behind it has been radio and audio. And from the early days of me getting into stuff, when you find like a passion, for me, it was when a kid at school gave me a battered old tape cassette, and on it was this radio show. And I didn't really know that the radio did sort of good comedies. It was always stuff that, you know, you would hear in the car on your way somewhere, and it would be quite weirdly political. And the jokes would go up like this, and then they go down like that. And that's when you knew when to laugh. And this was had no audience, and it was called On the Hour. And it was like a news show, and it was weirdly edited, and it had such imagination to it. And that's where I fell in love with audio. And so, cut to many years later, when there is this wealth of top quality comedy out there that tends to be, you know, more simple. It tends to operate on funny words, but also on the dynamic of the hosts or the presenters or whoever it happens to be. And you feel like you're part of the gang. You feel like you're at the pub table with them. You get to know the running jokes. And the shows can go on, they can ramble on, they've got enough space for you to get used to it. And it becomes, I think, like it becomes as funny as laughing with your friends, which is usually much funnier than laughing at anything anyone's written.
Yeah, I think there's something, I mean, the relatability of you do your important broadcast on Radio X. You've also done what you're talking about, Wallace, on Audible, which I actually really enjoyed because it felt like just you have each episode is around a certain topic, like your body warmer, or yes. Or people stealing your identity. These one topic things where you suddenly feel like you're having a nice you're just having a nice hug, you're having a nice chat with everyone, and obviously that sounds effortless, but that's not effortless, right?
Well, the Audible ones, there was some effort went into them, yes. Because you know, first of all, the event has to happen, and they're all real events. You mentioned my body warmer. I like body warmers. I feel comfortable in them.
Yes.
My arms are free. I feel like it's an any season type of thing, and I use them for undertaking small tasks or short journeys. And then one day someone noticed that I was wearing my body warmer, and he started to mock my body warmer.
He did.
And I didn't know how to react because it was like someone mocking my child. And so I thought that would be a good kind of jumping off point for an episode and talk to people about it. It was about analyzing things that don't matter in a way that makes them really matter. Because sometimes you then get to bigger ideas, like perhaps this guy was doing a power play. Perhaps this guy was jealous of me. Perhaps I'm the alpha male, after all, for wearing my body warmer in the face of such mockery. And then being able to discuss it with the right people and to get their takes, you know, all that stuff, all ad-libbed and improvised. And just, like I say, that feeling of being around a pub table with someone. But weirdly, a lot of the best comedy that you get on podcasts does feel effortless, because it is, again, between people who understand each other's rhythms, understand what makes them tick, understands how to needle them slightly, when to pull back. I've never been a fan of anything that puts people down or punches down. So for me, the warmth of something like that is what people are really drawn to. And it just makes it funnier as well, because you know no one's going home and crying.
This is true. And also I love the fact that Laura Prepon just could not understand the concept of a body warmer and thought it was made out of some kind of scuba gear, which I really liked.
I thought I was going out in scuba gear to that. I mean, I would deserve to be mocked if that was happening, but no.
I think the fact that it is like sitting with friends means that we can talk about anything. I don't know, but I'm going to ask you in a second about your favorite comedy podcast, but I listen to true crime podcasts, but also ones that really make me laugh.
That makes you sound quite evil.
It does, though. But
it depends on the crime.
Have you ever listened to My Favorite Murder?
No, I haven't, but should I?
Well, yes, absolutely. Well, that's the thing. It's two LA-based, but they're both comedians talking about things that they really like, which are dark and nasty, but also that if you didn't sort of laugh, you would probably cry about any of these situations. So that's the kind of thing. But we'll get onto that. What do you listen to as what makes you laugh?
I listen to a broad range of things. Sometimes what makes me laugh is I've got a thing where if I don't listen to the radio at night, I find that I start thinking about things and I can't sleep. And so I like to listen to very boring radio. And sometimes that involves, you know, speech radio or call-in radio from around the world. And I remember once trying to get to sleep, and there was like a legal hour where people would phone up about, boundary disputes with their neighbours, which is, I'm boring myself, even just remembering that. And then this one lady rang in just as I was nodding off. And she was an older lady. And she'd been banned from her 3rd gym in a row. And she wanted to know how to get her sort of money back. And they were like, well, you just get your money back. But hang on, what have you been banned for? And she was quite cagey about it. But now I can't sleep because I'm sort of quite intrigued by this. And it turned out she'd been banned from 3 gyms because she would go in there just to use the showers. And you go, well, okay, fine, but they can't ban you for that. But then it turned out that she was also taking things in there to wash. And you're like, well, now I can see why you were banned, really. But then it turned out that what she was bringing in to wash every day in the showers at the gym were all her dirty pots and plates. So there was just an old lady joining gyms in order to do her washing up in the showers. And I haven't slept since because I just started laughing at the ludicrousness of the everyday. And that for me is what makes me laugh the most, the kind of the real stories and the minutiae and the madness of the people who walk amongst us. That, and there are great podcasts out there where you can tell there's that kind of relationship we were talking about a minute ago, or someone who can forge a relationship with them. There's a podcast I really like called Early Work with Rhys James. And Rhys is a young comic. You'll have seen him on, I think, Mock the Week and things like that. And what he does is he talks very seriously about the early work of various comics or actors. And by early work, what I really mean is their pompous teenage poetry, their dreadful comics that they drew when they were a child, maybe their school projects. I went on there once, and I had my very important poem, Race, which was during the apartheid era. And it obviously, affected a young white boy in Loughborough so deeply that I wrote, race, is it all just about your face? And that was my whole poem. Very proud of it at the time.
Profound.
Thank you. So we discussed things like that. And then listening to what he does with so many different people about so many different topics, it's something you relate to as well, because we were all idiots until we weren't.
Well, until we hopefully weren't. We're maybe different kinds of idiots now.
Exactly.
So that kind of relatability and do you think over the last year people have looked for a different type of sort of comfort, or do you think we're just listening to the same things we did before? And in turn, has it given you, someone who really likes to comment on the everyday and the relatable experience, something that you didn't expect to find?
Yeah, I think that we've turned to any form of comfort wherever we can. Whether it's comfort, wherever it could be comfort food, it could be comfort telly, but listening has gone up a lot, and people have discovered far more. And I think there are some people who have had to turn their hand because all of their work has disappeared. Stand-ups and anyone in events and a lot of actors. Anyone who requires an audience has had to find their audience, but somewhere else. So you have people like Bilal Zafar on Twitch doing incredible forward-thinking comedy, completely different to what he would ever have thought he would do 14 months ago. You've got this Welsh stand-up called Mike Bubbins, who gets together with his pals and created Distant Pod, which has grown an audience out of absolutely nowhere, to the point where he just wants to do that for the time being. He'd be more than happy. So yeah, these sorts of relationships and friendships and the warmth again is what we all require. And I like these free-flowing podcasts. I like them with a format as well. A guy called Tom Price does a really nice one called My Mate Bought a Toaster, which reveals everything about the human psyche through what you ordered on Amazon.
Oh, no.
So he goes through your entire Amazon order history, and he works out, why did you buy that book on fairies? Why did you think it was a good idea to buy cufflink warmers or whatever it might be? How's that new bin treating you? And then there's a story about why you needed a bin or what cufflink warmers are or you know, people, the strange things you've bought other people. And within that, there's always a real story and real humor and real comedy. And the good podcast host listens to what their guest is saying so that they can then ask sort of new questions off the back of it. So Tom doesn't just go through a list of questions. Tell me about this, tell me about that. He will probe and question and engage. And so that's always good.
Well, that's one thing to ask you. What's the strangest thing you've bought over lockdown? Have you had things advertised to you? My Instagram stories have been insane. I think I bought CBD coffee, Danny.
Oh, wow. Oh my goodness! Hang on, doesn't that make you sleepy?
Exactly. So
and doesn't caffeine make you not
exactly.
sleepy?
That's what I thought. I thought, right, that's it. These people, Skull Crusher Coffee, they can sell me CBD coffee, and we'll see how that goes. And
yeah, I'll tell you, and nothing happens.
It's very strange. Nothing has happened. I did feel different, maybe slightly, but only because I knew I'd had a slightly different coffee.
Yeah, exactly.
But no, that's been my strangest thing.
That is a strange thing. I guess I've bought some strange things to while I spent 10 days trying to choose a hose.
What?
I was trying to choose a hose, and a hose pipe is it's difficult to buy. You know, do you go for Superflex? Do you go for Ultra Kink? All this sounds a bit dodgy, but it's all actual real things. Do you go for heavy duty? A lot of them have got 30-year guarantees. This is a long-term relationship. It's going to outlast a lot of your friendships. You've got to choose wisely and choose once.
How's the SEO for hose pipes? Best hose pipes UK. Do they toss up lots of sort of different people reviewing them for you?
Well, I don't know. I went on instinct alone.
Right.
And when you know, you know. And the heart wants what the heart wants. And so I went with the Jardina 50-meter Superflex.
And how's that working out for you?
Pretty good. Can't complain. I also bought a bug catcher and a cheese wand. Now, a cheese wand is what I call it. I don't think it's called that, but it makes you feel like you're doing magic with cheese. And you're familiar with the standard 4-sided cheese grater.
Yes, I am.
Yeah. And you mainly use one of the sides. The other one is too fine. The other one's too big. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they're hard to wash.
A nightmare to wash. And one of them's always too zesty.
Way too zesty.
You end up disintegrating a lime when all you need to have is a little bit of lime. Yeah.
They're death traps. Welcome to the world of the cheese wand. This is, you hold it in one hand and it's straight and you just glide it across like you're stroking it, like you're playing it like a violin.
Wow.
Like a cheese bow for a cheese violin.
Okay.
And you just gently do that and it falls and it's like it's raining gentle drizzles of cheese. So that was actually a triumph.
Okay. And what was the middle one you said before the cheese wand?
The bug catcher. The bug catcher is because I live out in the countryside now where everything is big and healthy. So it's not like the urban foxes of London that I used to see in an early morning that just look like a scraggly cat. These guys, these are like...
bug catcher you got for these foxes.
Yeah. The bug catcher came about because suddenly I encountered a new bug downstairs and I was like, what the hell is that? And my daughter is she's looking at me and she's getting that referred fear. And I'm worried she's now going to be scared of these things because she's seen her dad kind of go, what? And I go, oh, it's nothing. It's fine. Let's look it up. And it was called something like a Victorian devil's coach horse. And it buckles back. It looks like a scorpion or something. And it buckles its back towards you. And then it can shoot and spit a bile from its abdomen at you. And that's when I purchased a bug catcher.
We have a UK bug that can shoot bile.
Apparently. And the Victorians thought it put a curse on you as well, as if I need that. So it's enough to be spat at.
Right.
But I could do without a Victorian curse. So I got the bug catcher because I don't want to annoy them by squishing them. And this is just a very elongated device, much like the cheese wand.
Yes.
But with a little button you press that slides, like in Star Trek, a door open, and then you just kind of, and then you fling them in your neighbour's garden.
Yeah, it doesn't, I think I'd be too, if there was something that wanted to spit bile at me in my house, I think I would hoover it up, Danny. That would end up.
But then you've got it. But then you don't know what it's doing in there, and you don't know when it'll come out.
That's my fear of spider hooverage. My eternal fear is that if I hoover one up and it's pregnant with many, many baby spiders,
you're playing right into their hands. They're many hands.
Yes, that's exactly what we're doing. So, I asked a couple of people, usually because you started in video games writing a bit.
I did.
Like me and a lot of my fellow video games writers. So I was saying to people, I'm interviewing Danny Wallace today. I'm really excited. What should I ask him? And a very, very important question came up, which was, Danny Wallace action figure can come with 3 accessories. What are they?
Wow, that's a great question.
I'm going to use it on dates, I've decided.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Yeah.
Well, of course, the glasses.
Of course, yes.
I need glasses for they correct my vision and aid in the simple tasks of seeing, looking, glancing. That's mainly it, seeing, looking and glancing. And without them, I am naught. So they would have to be there.
Okay.
And also you've got the Clark Kent thing.
Yes, of course.
So if I need to get away.
I mean, nobody would know that you were if you had them off.
No one would know. And then I wouldn't know they didn't know either. Yeah. I would assume I got away with it because I couldn't see them. Of course,
no reactions. Okay.
So the glasses, a pen, of course.
Yep.
Because everything comes from the pen, writing, or it's a metaphor for the keyboard.
Yes, yeah.
And then my Indiana Jones bullwhip.
Of course. So that's your special action as well.
That's when I need to leap from building to building, as sometimes happens. When I need to rebuff an angered Victorian coach horse.
Wise.
What if I'm sitting down and I've forgotten my cheese wand at a separate area of the house and I can't get up again?
One crack.
Yeah, to either wrap it around the cheese wand and pull it back, or chase the cheese wand around the house, trying to get it closer to me, which is more effort. So I would say, the glasses, the pen, and the bullwhip.
Okay, that's all 3 things definitely that I associate with you, Danny.
Yeah, get that into production.
Of course. Well, I was also going to ask, what are you working on next that you're allowed to talk about?
I am working on next. I'm working on a bit of a secret project with a friend that we developed in lockdown. It's like things I've done before, but it's nothing like I've done before. And that will be coming soon. And apart from that, I've got a new book out on it'd be out about now, actually.
Great, perfect.
March 18th.
Wonderful.
And it's a kid's book. It's called The Day the Screens Went Blank. So in our lines of work, that would not be good.
No.
It was something an idea I had way before lockdown. And I thought, the day the screens went blank, imagine that. It just needs one explanation. Can you imagine? Because for parents thinking about their kids without screens, that's a bit of a nightmare because you have to engage and be a good parent. And for kids, that's be terrible as well because your parents would start trying to engage with you. And so without TVs or iPads or screens of any type. And I thought it'd be a sort of an interesting, fun idea. And then the world got weirder than the world in my book.
Yeah.
And it started to seep into the writing and became bigger still. So, with like staying at home and panic buying and conspiracy theories and misinformation. And so, and it also made me realize that if I wanted to phone someone when I was a kid, I had to remember their number. So if suddenly your phone's all stopped, for this kid, she wants to call her grandma, make sure she's okay, but no one knows her number. And you can't turn your screen on and type G for grandma because that's gone. And you can't Skype her or email her or text her. So she has to go to her. So cue a big old road trip across the country with no screens in a weird new world.
That sounds amazing. And what you're saying about the phone numbers, do you still remember all the phone numbers of your childhood friends? Because I do, but I don't remember anything else. So I can tell you all the numbers I'd used from my gran and from my aunt and all from my school friends, because that was back in the day when people used to answer the phone with the number.
Absolutely. I remember the first, when I lived in Dundee, it was 68980. I can say that, by the way, because those numbers will have changed radically. It was only like 5 numbers. I remember, every number from every house I was in. I remember every postcode.
Yeah.
But yeah, these were just things that you couldn't look up. You had to remember in a world where, you know, I tell my kids, if I wanted to watch a film, because they can just press a button and there's the film. But if I wanted to watch a film, I had to go to a place and wait for it to open and walk in and hope that film was there. And if that film wasn't there, if there was one other person in Loughborough, for example, who was watching Biggles, that meant I couldn't watch Biggles because one other person was watching Biggles. It's ridiculous.
Yes, we live in an interesting world now. Better in many, many ways, but we'll say that.
Biggles for everyone, I say.
Yes, that's a lovely place to conclude, Danny. I think I've taken a lot of your time up, so thank you very much. It was lovely to talk to you and learn about cheese wands, and now I need a cheese
wands. Yeah, get a cheese wand, rent Biggles, and avoid the Victorian coach horses, and that's a recipe for a good weekend.
There's your poster quote. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This episode of Podworld is supported by Dialect, a digital marketing agency whose superpower is finding and engaging audiences for tech and gaming brands from all around the world.
If you can't go off on a tangent about cheese wands in a show about comedy, well, quite frankly, when can you?
Well, here's the thing. It turns out, DMR, I have a cheese wand.
Hang on.
So I turned, because I was literally like, I think he was just talking about a grater with a handle. Like, I did, because in my head at the time, I was like, this magical cheese device. But then I went into my drawer and I was like, pretty sure this is a cheese wand. So I took a picture of the grater with a handle and a cover because it's really sharp. And I sent it to Danny. I was like, I think I have a cheese wand. He's like, yes, that's a fine example of a cheese wand. So yeah, so it turns out, twist, I have a cheese wand.
You have a cheese wand.
I just don't have a bug catcher.
Yeah, and you did not know it was a cheese wand, and you don't have the bug catcher. But
I don't have the bug catcher.
No, that
bug sounded awful.
It did. I did not know we had those things in the UK.
No.
I thought he was talking about Australia for a second. So in this last little section of the show, we basically bring together all the extras, as we call it, all the bits and pieces that we laughed our way around in researching for this episode. So they didn't quite make the top 4 because there can only be 4 at the top, the way we've structured it, but they're still really funny and entertaining, and they're definitely worth listening to. And then when we finish that, we sprinkle on top always a couple of listener recommendations. By the way, if you want to send us any more, please do to Podworld, either on Twitter, Instagram, and also we've just opened up our Facebook page. So actually all of those Podworld, you can tell us about what you've been listening to.
Yes, please. Tell us everything. We will listen to them and judge you. No, we won't judge you. I promise we won't judge you. But we will sprinkle them at the end of the podcast like delicious bacon bits in a salad in America.
Absolutely. So what were your extras, Lou?
My extras are grim because most people, I discovered that when I asked people on my the people that follow me on Twitter, luckily people, they're all really grim like me. So they all listened to last podcast on the left, which is pretty much what everyone responded with. But I will shout out again, these true crime guys, they know their stuff. They've done their reading. You will literally have that, oh my gosh, I'm actually going to literally explode with laughter on the train comedy. But at the darkest things that you really shouldn't be even cracking a smile at. I have caveats. It's really not for everyone. But I couldn't ignore all the people that told me that people should be listening to it because last podcast on the left really is something quite special, actually, in a very unique comedic way. Also, I know I talk about it all the time, but my favourite murder just makes me really happy. Yeah. But also, there's one episode in particular that if you start anywhere, it's episode 129. And it's called Coincidence Island. And it's about a man who dragged his wife to live on the Galapagos Islands. Now, this episode I listened to on a plane and it left me in a complete mess. Like literally, I was bursting in the way that I couldn't hold it in anymore. It literally was exploding out of every orifice while I was sitting on this plane, while people were probably trying to sleep and do the other things that people are doing on a plane. But yes, if you have no idea where to start, because yes, you like me, might have the case of, oh, there's hundreds of episodes, I really have no idea where to go, which is a legit response. Do go listen to episode 129. Non-crime related, I do have one, I promise.
Oh, good.
I've been listening to a podcast called Doughboys, which is 2 US comedians talking about and reviewing fast food restaurants and sit-down restaurants in America. And the episode that I listened to, again, had Nicole Byer in it because I think it was Carla Veloci on Twitter who said that anything with Nicole Byer makes her laugh. And it's absolutely true. Her episode with the Doughboys is really funny. So that's fun. Do listen to that. And it just also have something to eat before you listen to it because
you get really hungry.
Yeah, because suddenly I was like, I could just order McDonald's on Uber Eats.
Yeah.
You know? Oh no, Uber Eats, Just Eat, Deliveroo, other places are available. We're not advertising any of you. Please, if you would like us to air on the Uber Eats side, you can sponsor us if you like. But until then, all of the services are available. But yeah, so that made me laugh a lot in a way that I didn't really expect it to. Yes, so Doughboys.
So I really struggle with my extras. I kind of, I don't know if it says something about my semi-scientific brain, but I kind of had to put some kind of process in place to eliminate and get down to a smaller shortlist. And I basically measured how many times something made me laugh or smile.
Mark Kermode does that. When he's watching a comedy movie, he's literally like, how many times did it laugh? And I think he's got like a rating system of how many out loud laughs should a comedy thing get. So that's absolutely how comedy podcasts should be measured.
Absolutely.
How many times you chortle, how many times you snort.
Yeah.
That sort of T-spit moment.
Yes, absolutely. You know, that, and I had a few of those. So that's how I then ended up with the ones that were really very close to the top two that I just recommended at the top of the show. The first one is bananas. And this is just a genius idea because there are so many crazy bananas type news headlines around the world every day that make you go, what? And these guys, it's Kurt Brownohler and Scotty Landis, and they basically every week they have a special guest and they just discuss the news headlines and they go, these are just plain bananas. And just to give you an example, it was like, there's a man who installed 11 speed bumps on his street. You know, so they don't only just go, that's the headline, they then read the story, they obviously comment on it, and hilarity basically ensues. Or there was the penguins that were kicked out of a sushi restaurant twice. It's like, why twice? Or the story about, this one I really like, and I've heard a few of these, but about a woman who chugged an entire bottle of cognac before boarding a plane because she wasn't allowed to go through airport security with it.
That makes me feel sick vicariously. Could you imagine how awful you would feel? Literally, you took a first step. Yeah,
and then just going on a flight. Oh, God, can't believe it. But anyway, so this is really, really easy way to get into a comedy podcast. You can dip in anywhere. There are quite a few episodes, but it doesn't have to be at a specific point in time.
Also, it's part of the Exactly Right network, which is the My Favorite Murder network, the podcast network. And on that note, a secondary recommendation is Do You Need a Ride? Which is literally Karen Kilgariff.
It's Karen Kilgariff, yes.
Just driving around. Well, they're not driving around anymore. They're actually just sitting at home because they're not driving around. But that's also very funny as well. And it's really quite indulgent. So I think sometimes, and I think this is what we've tried to avoid in comedy podcasts, is they all just end up being the same podcast and it's just some dudes talking. And quite a lot of them are about that, but some, I mean, so many of them completely elevate that to an actual art form.
Absolutely.
And I think some of them can be a little bit like that. And it's the same what we're doing. We're just two people talking about podcasts. It's the same thing. But there's an indulgence somewhere. But some comedians just elevate it entirely.
Absolutely. And actually this next one, Smartless, was that it is three dudes talking. But I was drawn to it because one of the dudes is Jason Bateman.
That'll do it.
I'm a massive fan. But also he's got Sean Hayes with him from Will and Grace. And Will Arnott, who is also in Arrested Development. And these three, the structure of their podcast is so simple because they're basically, they meet up, or they used to meet up, and now they do it through Zoom. And one of them has a secret guest that he absolutely can't tell the others who that is until they literally meet up. And they then have a totally unscripted conversation, and they try and find shared experiences with that guest and with the host, so that they can talk about it. And it is, it is improvisation. There's no doubt. It's genuinely funny improvisation by three really, really witty people. And that, given that they're quite A-list in terms of hosts, so their guests are just crazily A-list. So you've got George Clooney or Billie Eilish or Megan Rapinoe, who, for those of you who don't know, is a US football or soccer player.
She's amazing.
She is so cool. I not only as a player, but as an activist and just generally.
She's incredible.
Just an incredible woman. And then there's Kamala Harris was on it. And then.
Sure, just Kamala Harris.
Yeah, why not?
Just Kamala Harris. Yeah.
And I listened to the Neil deGrasse Tyson episode and I just loved that. So anyway, that's just to mention just a few. Easy to dip in and out of. If you like any of those three guys, then give it a go. And then I came across a very, very different podcast, which is Who Shat on the Floor at My Wedding? So this is actually based on a true story, and it involves, as they say, two brides and one turd. And the premise is that these two women were getting married in Amsterdam on a boat, and at some point, probably fairly early on in the evening, it turns out, someone actually takes a shit on the floor, and one of the brides finds it. And then the podcast is not really about that. It's about them trying to find the culprit. And they basically team up with a super underqualified detective who's Lauren Kilby. And they start interrogating the guests, hooking up bridesmaids to polygraphs. And they bring in genuine forensic experts. And the whole thing is quite surreal, but hilarious. And Lauren Kilby as the amateur detective, for me, totally steals the show.
I can't wait to listen to this. This was on, you added this to the list, and I will listen to all of this. And I'm kind of now saving it. It sounds glorious.
Yes.
I need to save it for I literally feel like I need to save it for a day that is a sad day so that I can listen to Who Shat on the Floor at My Wedding.
Absolutely.
And it will make my day better.
It will. And then the final podcast I wanted to mention is a brand new one. And it's called Comedy Gold Mines. And I mentioned it just before. It's Kevin Hart's new podcast. And he basically sits down with some very, very funny people. And they might be like established comedians like Jerry Seinfeld, but they also might be up and coming comedians. And they basically discuss how they started. They discuss their sort of early material, their latest material, very much into anecdotes. They go down these little paths of just talking together, and they just end up comparing notes, etc. It's not necessarily a laugh out loud kind of podcast, but it's if you're into comedy, it's definitely a really interesting and amusing conversation. And it's for those who are maybe more into the sort of science of comedy, or not necessarily science of comedy, but you know what I mean in terms of what makes a good comedian. And he has, because it's Kevin Hart, he can get some incredible guests on that. And there's only, at the time of recording, I think there's only 4 or 5 episodes, so there'll be more to come from him.
So it's time for listener recommendations, and we'll be fast because we're aware that we've recommended an awful lot of podcasts to you. But just one from my Twitter feeds. Nicola Richards says it's an obvious answer, but Adam Buxton, particularly when he's with Joe, and the Tash Dimitri episodes, he literally makes me cry with laughter. Yes. Adam Buxton's podcasts always make me laugh. And I really love his intro music. His intro is amazing. It's genuinely a happy making thing. So yes, Nicola, Adam Buxton, who I feel bad that we haven't mentioned already.
Yeah, no, I'm glad he's made the list because his podcast is brilliant and it's super, super popular. And for me, I got, being slightly less cool, my recommendation came through on LinkedIn.
LinkedIn?
Rather than Twitter. But
don't suggest that people connect us to us on LinkedIn. Don't make me... I don't want to have to check LinkedIn as well, DMR. No. It just... I don't know why, but anyway, it came in from Phil Jones on LinkedIn, and he said, if you do ever venture into comedy podcasts, so he was preempting us doing a comedy podcast episode. Good work, Phil.
I can thoroughly recommend checking out The Offensive. It's based on a fictional Premier League team called Ashwood City and is a blend of The Office and The Thick of It. He does warn, though, that the language is quite fruity, so please be aware if young ears are nearby. I have been listening to this. I'm a big football fan, and I do like the sort of absurdity of the language and the whole culture of football. I'm a football fan more for the game, but actually the whole circus that surrounds it is quite interesting.
That's a genre that I think we should absolutely do at some point, which is fictional podcasts.
Yes.
There's a lot of horror fictional podcasts that I find genuinely really, really scary. So it'd be great to, I think at some point we can talk about that as a genre. So keep that in mind somewhere, even start recommending them, because that's something that I'd like to cover soon.
Absolutely. But for this one, I think we have actually run out of time.
We have.
So what genre are we going to talk about next time, Lou?
Next episode, we're going deep into the natural world, because obviously we've not really been able to go out and about very much, so it's nice to be able to do it in our ears. And we have an interview with the host of the Wild podcast, Chris Morgan. But yes, that's it for us. So don't forget to get in touch with us at Podworld on Twitter or Instagram if you've got any recommendations for us or general comments about the show. If you want to sponsor us, Uber Eats looking at you. But again, thank you for listening to us rant about podcasts, and happy listening.
Podworld is produced, edited and hosted by Louise Blaine and David Marr Roberts, otherwise known as DMR. The design and graphics from Dylan Shannon and the research by Ella Marr Roberts. The theme music was composed by Dan Phillipson. We'd like to say a big thank you to the team at Dialect for their never-ending support.